Good morning, everyone, and welcome to yet another intellectual meeting of the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies. Today, we will be listening to a distinguished professor, and he will be the third professorial fellow speaking to us, sharing his intellectual property with us free of charge, and we appreciate that. The person of Professor John Ayotunde Ishola Bewaji, we can classify him either as a permanent migrant or temporary migrant, or in between, as myself and Dr. John were discussing a few minutes ago. He is the third of the professorial fellow we instituted when we started this center in May. In March this year. And the first person was Professor Emeritus Godwin Sogolo, followed by Professor Abdallah Uba Adamu, a double professor, and indeed the visionary for this center. He was the one that actually created this as a vice chancellor based on a grant from TED Fund. And today we can talk about sharing knowledge. Professor Bewaji is a professor of distinction, a professor of philosophy at the University of West Indies Monarch campus in Jamaica. He's also a senior research associate at the University of Johannesburg, Republic of South Africa. Professor Bewaji has been in the system for over 40 years, and he has trained many of us. He started his career at the University of Ife, what you now call Obafemi Awolowo University. He's a full trained Nigerian, and he has relocated into the diaspora. And I think my first encounter with Prof was sometimes in 2000 or 2001 at the Africa conference hosted at the University of Texas in Austin. And Prof was not only there to deliver his paper, but also was so warm that those of us that are young, are still young, maybe associate professor, assistant professor then, we warmly reached out, and he warmly accepted us, and we kept in contact. So today, Prof will be speaking on the subject of social contract, Omoluabi, Ubuntu, in the context of migratory ideas as a conversational media. But let me say this. Today, we are also joined, as usual, by distinguished professors that he will personally introduce. Some are from all over the world. We have people from all over Nigeria, people from North and South America, Europe, New Zealand. But in the house, we have our own Professor Emeritus Godwin Sogolo, the first distinguished professorial fellow of the center. We welcome you, sir. We also have someone that I must also introduce for those of you that are within Nigeria and even outside Nigeria. You must have heard about Mr. Tokunbo Abiru. He is Omoluabi, incarnate, and his philosophy as well as his tenet is predicated on Omoluabi. He's a senatorial candidate and is not here to campaign. He actually saw this advert and he called me. Interestingly, we happened to be classmates, and he was the immediate past managing director of Sterling Bank, I believe. is here with us also. We welcome you, a former commissioner in Lagos State. I welcome you, sir, Mr. Tokumbo Abiru. Because of the fact that he preaches Omoluabi, he called me and said, "Oh, TJ, I saw something. Can I join? You know, I want to learn." And that is what public officials or those who intend to take public office should do. So he's here with us, and I thank you, sir, Mr. Abiru. We pray for you, and when you get there, remember this center to at least give a kind of grant and fund for the center, because all these professors that I've called, Professor Bewaji giving the third professorial, they are doing it gratis. Can you imagine it is 4 a.m. at his location? That is Professor Bewaji, 4 a.m. Baba is older than me, he's older than most of us, maybe with the exception of Professor Sogolo. And you can see him waking up, agile. And he has not only been joining us, he started with us since we started. Okay, we thank you very much, sir. At this point, and without identifying more people, and I will recognize some of them, we expected some government functionaries, particularly from the Southwest, that plan to join. The Director General of Center of Black Civilization in Oshogbo, and there's some Osun State functionaries, as well as the former Deputy Governor of Lagos State, Her Excellency, Dr. Idiat Adebule, also, I believe she's somewhere here, but we will pay courtesy to them. Without wasting much time, I will give the virtual space to Professor Bewaji John, or John Bewaji, and we'll give him 50 minutes to speak with us. Sir, you can share your PowerPoint, and we are ready to learn, sir. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor Tijani, for that very warm introduction. I hope that everybody is able to see my screen.
Yes, sir. They can see it. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we can hear you.
I want to thank my Oga, Professor Sogolo, for all the many years of mentorship and your leadership. When I grow up, I hope to be like you, you know. So, and I want to thank my colleagues from everywhere who have joined. I have with us Professor Antony Savari Raj. He is the Indian professor of philosophy that the government of India has made available to the University of the West Indies. Professor Savari Raj, thank you very much. I have colleagues also from UWI who are with us, you know, and they are all here for the discussion. Now, what I intend to do, contrary to the usual practice or probably the expectation, I do not intend to talk about myself because my experiences are not that interesting to anybody. And as such, what I will do is to talk about ideas and how ideas migrate, and during those migrations, ideas do interact. Let me see if I can share another screen. Let me see if that is possible. If I'm able to share another screen. Then I'll want you to, just take a second to be part of that.
Sorry, sir, the audio is not on for the document, the short documentary. Okay.
Can everybody hear?
Not yet, sir.
Is
We
it
can
audible?
hear you, but not the, it's not yet.
All right. Thought it would automatically happen.
It should. It's still not.
Still not?
Yes, sir. Maybe you want to speak to that documentary and...
Yes, I will. Sorry about the problem with that. So am I back on? Prof?
Yes, sir, you are back on, sir. You are back on.
Okay,
yes.
all right, yes. The essence of that little skit is to show what humanity has witnessed in history. In other words, I am suggesting what that skit is about is this gentleman left his car in his driveway and he went on to get water to drink. By the time he came back, he met another man in the car and the guy was about to drive off, so he stopped it and called the police. The police came and they asked the gentleman to come out of the car. And the guy claimed that, well, he has discovered the car was left open, and he went in and he's driving it, and since he has discovered it, it is now his car, that he is now the owner. So the policeman said he needs to get out. The owner said he needs to get out. He said he's not getting out. He asked the policeman, what is today's in history? And he said it's Columbus Day. And then he asked the policeman, what did Columbus do? And he said Columbus discovered the Dominica. And then what happened after that? Columbus took over Dominica. Many of us, when we were young, we were taught that Mungo Park discovered River Niger. I don't know how many of us, still remember that quite very well. And we sang a very lovely song about Mississippi, which was claimed to be the longest river in the world. Mississippi, Mississippi. Mississippi, Mississippi. But you know, Mississippi is not the longest river in the world. But anything the white man does, he claims it to be his own and the very best. So the skit resonated with me because that's the only social media that I use in an active basis. So as a people, as an individual, and as a youth growing up in the Apostolic Church in Atesaoke in Nigeria, all of these things always give me room to ponder. And as peoples of the South, that is, when they make us happy, they say we are developing societies. But those of us who know our situation know that, you know, we are the most depraved, the most destabilized, the most controlled societies, that we don't even have agency. So the question is, what does this say to our indigenous knowledge systems, our ideas, our values, our civilizations? And that was what led me to thinking about ideas in migration and migratory ideas. So how would I approach my discussion today? I plan to use what I call phenomenological hermeneutics to deal with it. That is a kind of personal engagement and interpretation and understanding of those things that I have encountered, that I have been taught, that I have had to interrogate, that I've had to reflect upon as they, one way or the other, have impacted my own evolution as a student of philosophy, because I call myself a student of philosophy. Sometime around 2006, Louis Ricardo Gordon, and I've been trying to get Professor Gordon to visit Nigeria. He is one of the most brilliant minds that you can encounter. He published this book titled Disciplinary Decadence. And in that particular book, he discussed the so-called ideas, you know, that parade, that masquerade as intellectual erudition, whereby the right hand knows not what the left hand is doing. And that is the bane of academy or scholars who, you know, speak all kinds of jargons that nobody understands, that nobody is able to relate to. And because they are constantly being driven by the definition of success as received, the decadence continues. We work in silos. People from various disciplines don't understand what other disciplines are doing or saying. So I then thought that it was possible to bring three ideas, three value systems together. Well, actually two. One is the Western individualistic idea, and the other two are one, because they are very similar, both historically and in the ways in which they manifest together. That's the social contract theory and Omoluabi and Ubuntu. Those who may have read my little essay, The Social Contract Theory, which was published by the World Congress of Philosophy, I think it was 1998, would see the genesis of the evolution of this idea that I'm going to be speaking about. So what I then do is to see, based on my own understanding and reflection, how these ideas clash, how these ideas have clashed, but most of us do not even understand the clash. Now, you know that phenomenology is the study of experience, and now we experience. In other words, because we are subjective and objective human beings, things are not just done to us, we also experience in very peculiar and personal ways. And phenomenology studies the structure of conscious experience as experienced from a subjective first-person point of view. And within that, it leads to what is known as intentionality. If you want to look at it within the economic or social science perspective, you can call it agency or activity, action directed towards certain objects or towards certain beings in the world. And then phenomenology leads to analysis of conditions of the possibility of intentionality. Conditions which involve motor skills, habits, background, social practices, language, etc., etc. Now, I did mention Lewis Gordon, and I do hope that most of us will go and read that very short book. It's just about 150-something pages, but it's full of ideas that can open up our minds. So, as a child, I've always wondered what was there. In those days, as a kid, you wake up very early in the morning, which is part of, I don't think Professor Tijani needed to apologize, because it doesn't matter when I go to bed. I always get up before 4 o'clock or latest 5 o'clock anyway. It's part of the habit that I formed, because as a kid, you have to wake up very early in the morning, go to the farm to bring something home, and then get yourself ready to go to school, and you must never be late. I don't know how many people know Professor Dakwa Adeluba. Dakwa Adeluba was in the Department of Theater Arts for many years at the University of Ibadan before he went, I think somewhere in the north after retiring or something. His father was the principal or the headmaster of my primary school. If you are late, you really have a serious problem to deal with in those days. It's not like now when people now glorify what they call Nigerian time or African time. It's part of the kinds of things that have always made me to wonder about so many things. So what was there? Where did it come from? When did it come about? Who brought it about? How did it come about? From what did it come about? What about me? And you know that all of these are curiosities. And all human beings and in all societies, they have always been curious. And the innate capacity of humanity to find out things led to answers to these puzzles, because life itself confounds. Being, not just life, confounds. Death, transitions confound. Everything confounds. And if you remember Professor Mazrui and the triple heritage as in Christianity, Islam, and ATR, that is indigenous African religions, even schooling itself confounds, because when you look at it, many of us are lifelong students. Someone like me, I'm always a student, and it's something that I'm proud to say when I say I'm a student of philosophy. But imagine a situation where you have to go to school from age 6 and you continue until age 30 just to prepare yourself to earn some living. And nowadays, most of our children who get their degrees and whatever they get, they don't even have any jobs. So they even find it more difficult not to begin to question what is all this about. So speculation is a necessity. Reasoning is a necessity. And therefore, human beings create myths, they create stories, they create narratives, they create tropes. a way of coping with ignorance, intellectual, epistemic, and cognitive challenges. I mean, you can see examples all over the world. All civilizations have creation stories. Incidentally, the creation story that is most popular in our clime is the Genesis. And the Genesis started by saying, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That in itself is problematic for many reasons, because if it was in the beginning, who was there to know that that was the beginning? And if it was the beginning, what language was it written? You know, who knew about it? But in most cases, we take those things without even reflecting about the conundrums that they open up. And incidentally, the oldest Jew lived no longer than probably about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. And if you factor that into the equation, how somebody who lived even 10,000 years ago could say that was the beginning, could tell the story of humanity. When you remember that in Zimbabwe, discoveries of chemistry have been found. We are not talking just about anything, chemistry, sophisticated chemistry, how people were able to make paint. And you know that the making of paint is one of the most complicated things for you to make it in such a way that it can be consistent and it can last. If anybody read my book, Black Aesthetics, you will see that in the Tassili region in the Sahara, what is now the Sahara, which is now desert, which used to be very lush vegetation in those days, you will find that in the caves there were paintings on the wall, there were drawings on the wall. Some of them are older than 15, 20,000 years ago. So I'm just saying that ideas were created as explanations and rationalizations. And the creations of those ideas were meant to be useful. They were more or less paradigms to guide behavior, to guide understanding, to guide relations. And they were tools, they were handlers for survival. And they were creation of structures. So in all societies, in all places on earth, for as long as humanity has lived, thinking, reflection, and the use of the mind has been what saved humanity from certain destruction. Destruction both natural and unnatural, okay? And the only thing that has been the salvation of humanity for solving daunting existential problems, taming and surpassing all other sentients, bigger and smaller, more dangerous and capricious than him or her, has been thinking, ability to think, ability to organize, ability to codify, ability to narrate, ability to memorialize experiences so that we do not forget, which is part of the challenge we have in Nigeria today. People forget. We forget history. We don't learn from history. We don't learn from things that have happened to us. What led to the Biafra War? What led to the Rwanda genocide? What led to the colonization of Africa, both by the Arabs and by Europe? We don't learn from those things, and consequently, we tend to repeat those things. So I ask myself, if any one of us has reflected about these issues, then you will be able to see that, you know, if we don't engage these issues, we are only going to continue. We are only going to continue the suffering, the decadence, the destruction. And a lot of things happen to us. And the most important thing that I look at there is what I call the greed-infested exceptionalism. Those exceptionalisms were first perfected by Jews and Europeans. Let me explain. Because as somebody who grew up in the Apostolic Church, anybody knows the Apostolic Church, that was before this Pentecostalism thing. It was out of the Apostolic Church that the CAC, you know, Christ Apostolic Church emerged. And after that, we now have the cherubim and the cherubim, as a fellow will call them, and the celestials and the all kinds of fire on the mountain and fire under the rock and all kinds of characters. parading as Pentecostals. So the fear factor is always there. The fear factor is always there because death is always around the corner. If anybody has ever had children, you will know that the human infant is one of the most vulnerable animals in the world. If you have a day-old child and you don't take care of that child, the child will be eaten up by ants, okay? And the mother, after birth, is virtually helpless. So consequently, human beings have always been aware of their sentience. And they've always been so aware. Consequently, they've always been able to transcend, to use that awareness to protect themselves. But there is also the ignorance factor, what I call epistemic deficits and epistemic limitations, which is what imbues the intellect of most of our leaders today, the inability to learn, the inability to think. And the greed factor, the desire to secure now and tomorrow for self against all odds, from all and against others. It is what has led to the kinds of economies that we are taught, which is what Professor Claude Ake, describes as social science as imperialism. It is built on destruction, the worst, the most distrustful thing in our lives. My friend and colleague who has transitions to ancestorhood, many of you may know him, Professor Moses Oke, and myself, we were trying to do an essay or a book on what we call the outsider and the insider. We called it the ours, theirs dichotomy. The way the West sees things is totally different from the way Africans see things. The West sees binaries, they see polarities, they see dichotomies. African culture, some people will call it conscientism, as Nkrumah did. Will see it as inclusiveness, as embracing, others. These have implicated alternative views of society, of culture, of economics, of religions, of governance, of technology. So the disciplinary decadence then is the masquerading of disciplinary necessity and its purveyors as imbued with intellectual erudition. And this is exactly how Lewis Gordon described it. It is the emergence of disciplines that has often led to the forgetting of their impetus in the living human objects. The results are special kinds of decadence. One such is disciplinary decadence. It is the ontologizing or reification of a discipline. We treat our disciplines as if it were never born and has always existed and will never change, or in some cases die. And then we create what I call disciplinary echo chambers with no echo-locators. Because by the time you get so full of yourself, you are now the professor of philosophy. You are the professor of management. You believe, you tend to continue to now think that you are superior to every other person because people have dignified you with this bogus title. And you then create echo chambers and you have no compass, either moral or otherwise. So I found some of the things that made it possible for me to do the kinds of hermeneutics that I've been able to do. I found the work of Professor Karl Popper very, very insightful here. It has been very, very central to my ability to deconstruct and demystify many aspects of Western academy. Incidentally, when I won the T.T. Solaru Prize for best result in the BA philosophy, a book was given to me well, I used the money that I got to buy a book, and the title of the book is Conjectures and Refutations. And, Professor Makinde of blessed memory, a Popperian scholar, led us into reading most of Popper's works. Nowadays, most of our youth don't read. They don't know anything about Fanon. They don't know anything about Rodney. They don't know anything about Satima. They don't know anything about anything. These were publications which enabled me to see clearly through the various aspects of Western intellectual tradition, especially its reification and patronizing exclusion of other peoples from philosophical table of participation. And it was built on greed. And it's a greed that bred politics, which fed economics. So now I come to the social contract. I am being very, very mindful of the time, which my Oga gave me. I currently have another 20 minutes to finish this. So the social contract tradition is attributed to Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. And as I argued in my paper, I claim that it has metaphysical, ontological, epistemological, historicists, ethnic, ethical, economic, psychological, and religious foundations. It cemented the false idea of Greek genesis of democracy as an invention which showed the world the only way in which civilized humanity can be governed. And we are all witnessing what is happening in the US currently. I like to say that democracy as practiced in ancient Greece was absolutely undemocratic, because that democracy, that what took place in the Agora, those who are aware will know that it was only less than 10% of the entire population of Greece that assembled, and they were the propertied class, they were the adults, and they were typically male, which is what still takes place currently, or what Western democracy wants to continue to foist on us. And they came nothing near Yoruba democratic practice, where it is believed that Omodegma, Agbagma, Nlafiche, Sedale Ife, that is, the child is wise, and the adult, that is, the elder, is wise, is the foundation on which the ancient city of Ile-Ife was built. And we have another side of it when it is said, Owo omode ko to pepe, tagbalagba walking be. In which case, the child, and the Igbos have a saying that what an elder sees sitting down, a youth cannot see, even when they climb on top of the Iroko tree. So what I'm trying to suggest is that the social contracts mask the glorification of greed, the human capacity for the cruelty and debasement of humanity of the other, whichever way the other is defined, either through race, through gender, through class, or whatever way you want to look at it. That's what the social contract is about. So when you try to engage it, they tell you, oh, no, the social contract is not actually a historical event. And it can never have been a historical event, because if that was to be the case, there will be no human beings left. Because as I just told you, the human being needed to make sacrifice for others, for himself and for others to even survive. The human infant is the most vulnerable of animals. Most other animals can survive on their own the moment they hatch or the moment they drop from their parent. In the case of the human infant, our children cannot even survive on their own, even when they're already 20s and 30s. And in some instances now in their 40s and 50s. They're still dependent, they're still living at home. So the social contract is, they say, oh, it's just an intellectual experiment. Oh, it's a hypothetical construct. And it's a necessity for equity, fairness, and justice, as our friend John Rawls did in his apologetics for greed and degradation of humanity, calls the social, a theory of justice. If you read Charles Mills, you understand exactly what I mean, how he was able to deconstruct Rawls and others of that tradition. So this contract is the best arrangement that can legitimize delegation, representative, democratic, and others. And the social contract is divinely ordained or sanctioned by Almighty, who sees all his children as equal. I don't know what else could be worse than that last part. So The social contract has been subjected to discussion, to critique, and one of it is Charles Mills, which I just mentioned in the racial contract. He effectively argued that the relationship between Western societies and others, and this is something that is borrowed from not just the Western, is something that evolved in the Arabian desert, you know, which is the whole thing about the myth of the chosen race and the promised land. I mean, it's so bogus that anybody who has any ability to reflect will know that it couldn't make sense. The events of the last 2 decades in the 21st century has confirmed beyond doubt that the social contract is only frivolity, you know, which has been passed to us. So on what empirical data are the material presuppositions of contractarianism built? Absolutely nothing. What is the validity of epistemological foundation? Zero. Is the contract theory derivable from any other sociological thing except the state of nature? It could not be derived from anything. Don't forget that while John Locke was preaching social contract, he was actually investing in slavery in the Americas. So many people don't really understand that that was taking place. Has any human being ever known what is called the state of nature? I described it in my narratives of struggle as, you know, life being nasty, brutish, British, and short. And to what extent are the legal and moral foundations of contractarianism sacrosanct? So the social contract is built on Darwinism, okay? And it is built on this false Adamic great fall, for which all humanity are supposed to feel guilty. I don't feel any such guilt because, you know, that wasn't my history. My ancestors didn't fall from anywhere to anywhere. But they needed something to prop up capitalism, which is what Popper did by talking about the poverty of historicism and its open society and its enemies. The polarities that I mentioned, the so-called excluded mediums, when I tell my students that a coin doesn't have two sides, they ask me, what do you mean? I said, when you toss up a coin can fall on 3 sides. It has the head, the tail, as well as the edge. And then they say, well, it doesn't fall on the edge. I said, no, that's not true. If you toss it in the sand as children playing, you know, scrimmage in those days, you know that the coin at times falls on the edge. It may be very, very exceptional, but it does. But the whole thing is built on the idea that humanity were beasts. And because they were beasts, it meant that, you know, the only way to go about it is a democracy, which is what we find. And anybody familiar with democracy in God's own country that has produced Nixon, Reagan, Bush, and Trump will understand what I'm talking about. So alternative models have been constructed. And in my understanding of those alternative models, they have been shaped by discussions in African philosophy. And, you know, you can read some of the materials that I have here, but they are not the only ones. There are so many efforts to resist the truth about Africa's place in human intellectual and cultural history. This is where I come to Omoluabi, because, you know, time, in spite of my effort, time is running. Now, Omoluabi, both as metaphysics and ontology of person, is built, and whatever I say about Omoluabi is also applicable to Ubuntu. I was reading something that a colleague wrote, who is a Jamaican. He didn't even know that I had lived in Botswana for a year. And as I've visited the region since 2002, at least about 10 times now, and I'm familiar with those discussions there. So whatever I say about Omoluabi also applies to Ubuntu, and I do believe this is part of the reason why Sheikh Anta Diop was able to talk about the cultural unity of Africa, you know, and don't ever allow anybody to talk to you about Africa south of the Sahara, because as I mentioned, the Sahara was not always the way it is now. It used to be very lush vegetation, where people lived, where animals, you know, roamed very freely. And consequently, Africans migrated, you know, from the abode of humanity in the Nile Valley to everywhere. And if you look, you know, further to the east, in the Pacific, you will see blacks there, you know, who have adapted both physiologically and otherwise. And that's the story of humanity. So what is the metaphysics or ontology of Omoluabi? It is based on person within community. And if you read Ifa, you will understand that human beings in Nina, you know, is a product of our humanity, and that humanity is always work in progress. That is why Ifa is very, very central to Yoruba religion as well as Yoruba culture. The epistemology on which it is founded is one that is derived both from our experience in the sense that as human beings, we, you know, we learn and we have science. And we have built civilizations, and those civilizations are very, very important. And the ethics, the aesthetics, the sociology of association, which was so ably described by Professor Akinshola Akiwowo, you know, is very, very important here. Many of us don't engage this literature as such. We're always citing European things because we want to be acknowledged, we want to be accepted. We don't study our own. And if we do study our own, we will be able to appreciate some of the very critical components of what I'm talking about. I don't know, you know, in those days, whenever I go home, you know, which I do very frequently now, I'll go to the various bookshops, University of Ibadan, Ife, and other bookshops, you know, along Jericho in Ibadan, and I'll buy books. One of the things I usually buy are the inaugural lecture series. I don't know if people are familiar with this very little work by Professor Folarin Shillong when he did his inaugural in 1986. In that particular text, he recorded the fact that somewhere around 18 something, when the first Europeans visited Abeokuta, they found that the governance system that was there was way superior to anything Europe had, both in terms of, you know, the organization, both in terms of jurisprudence, in terms of law and order, in terms of the configuration of society. When you travel through Yoruba land and you see the way cities are planned, okay? I mean, in my little corner, which is the town of Esaoke, everybody wants their house to face the road. And consequently, it means that navigating the city is very, very easy. And that is something that is not something that anybody had to teach us from Europe. People now look at all the architecture, some of the white elephant that they bring, where you don't have cross ventilation of air and light, which then bring about the necessity. It's totally on Omoluabi for anybody to be building the kinds of edifices that we now import from the cold regions. And we build them, and then they now need to consume electricity in order to generate cooling, to have air circulation. I mean, the last visits that I made to Kenya, I visited some of those institutions there, and I found, and I was very, very happy. And this also happens in places in Botswana and other countries in the Southern African region. They actually build their houses in such a way that they don't need to put on light. The universities don't need to put on light except when it is raining and dark or in the night, because they build it in such a way that the rays of the light of the sun is able to illuminate, you know, and they build it that in such a way that during their winter, very little energy is needed to warm it up. Those are very inspiring stories about how our people have lived. And if you look at our society, you will find that this concept of Omoluabi that I'm talking about is very, very significant. And it has been the foundation of you know, what I call the alternative tropes, which I now use to interrogate the Western social contract. I mean, there could be nothing more.
You have 5 minutes, sir.
Sir.
5 minutes, sir.
Yes,
5 minutes.
I'm trying to do well. Don't worry. May I write? So when you look at Ubuntu, you also find that the same kinds of appreciation of society is what is preached there, because it is built on the idea that I am because we are. Because if there is no society, there is no way the individual would have emerged. And some of the ideas that you can consult, you know, I listed some names there, but let me go to those who have recognized and preached what is called African Renaissance. There's this gentleman who is currently at Towson University in Maryland, Christos Evangelou, who speaks very fluent Greek. And because he's able to read all those texts, he was able to tell us about the genesis of what is called Greek philosophy. And he claims that there is nothing like that. And therefore, I am suggesting that the only way Africa can begin the redemptive process is to interrogate these things, social contracts, Omoluabi, and Ubuntu. Now, if we go back and teach our children that civilization, science, technology started in Africa, that the ideas that emigrated from Africa was what led in various ways to these things that you'll find globally. And in the process of migration, those ideas mutated in transit because people have different experiences. Why is it America embraced pragmatism? Because it was the miscreants in Europe, the vagabonds in Europe who went to the US. And when they got to the US, they destroyed the Amerindians, the indigenous populations. And because of that, they embraced this idea of pragmatism where there is no truth. And that is what Donald Trump is doing. There is no truth. Everything is tradable. Everything depends on the results you get from it. If you are able to be successful, then it is good. The question is, can the greed of a few destroy the beauty of humanity and our capacity for humaneness? So I'm suggesting for Africa that the concocted superiorisms and exceptionalism that we are taught to us, and the various ways in which these dogmas have concretized and become destructive for us, we need to engage them, okay? They employed religion, they employed education, they employed brute force. And they use all of them in dastardly ways to destroy us through concerted epistemicide, which is the destruction of the values and the ideas of others. They have created in us what I call epistemic deficit. And that has led to a total loss of confidence in ourselves, in our ancestry, in our capacity for agency. And I'm saying that we need to look inwards instead of praying to the ancestors of other people. And we are waging wars of others on each other. The fight over land that started in the Middle East, I tell people that if there was no Islam, Islam had to be created because there must be an antidote to Jewish greed about the promised land. When you have 10 children and one of them claims that everything that belonged to the 10 now belongs to him because he's the chosen one and he has the promised land was not a vacant land. that creates problem. So we need to reclaim our indigenous knowledge systems. We need to reclaim our humanity. We need to teach African history. And Zaslavsky has documented a book that she calls Africa Count. So why is it that in the abundance of waters, our fool is thirsty? I don't know if I have time to play, a couple of songs to close up, but any of you can check that. So who benefits from the wars, from the tribalism, from the religious schisms and the isms, from the infrastructure decay, the poverty and the rot? Definitely not Africans. It is not Africans. It's those merchants of death. And I tell people, we are all complaining about the Fulani herdsmen and all kinds of things. I said to a colleague that Nigeria alone can accommodate all the Fulanis of the world, but we have to do it in such a way that we have to transition from primitivism to modernity. Through ranching, we can build a new structure of animal husbandry where everything in the cow is useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor John Bewaji. And I could see our own Professor Gregory Okagbari becoming also much more interested when you mentioned ranching. And I think he will make his comment. We thank you, Professor Okagbari, for always being with us. Just like Baba Sogolo, Professor Okagbari is also one of our senior professors at National University. And then from day one, he has always been with us, finding time to join us. Let me quickly also recognize and thank one of my teachers at Lagos State University, Professor Omotayo. We'll give you time to speak because you also look at it from another perspective. You will make your comment shortly, sir. We want to thank also all the Tedford Morgan scholars. The pioneer Tedford Morgan scholars are here. Those are the first wave of the front of Morgan State University and Tedford agreement for training doctoral and postdoctoral Nigerians at Morgan that we signed under the visionary. Having said that, I'm going to set the ball rolling. I've also asked you to kindly let me know if you have questions or comments. But let me seek the permission of Professor Emeritus Sogolo, sir. I've asked you to unmute. And then Professor Bewaji, you can stop sharing. You can stop sharing so that we can see everybody. I want to seek Professor Sogolo's permission to extend till about 15 minutes. That is 12:15 instead of 12 o'clock. Yes. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir. The VC is unavoidably absent. I think there is a council or something meeting going on. So we will take comments after mine or question as follows. I will unmute Professor Ayo Omotayo. I will unmute Professor Bayo Omolola, and then Professor Kagbari. If I see another hand, I will unmute you, and then Professor Emeritus Sogolo will crown it all for us, and then we'll call it a day. You mentioned training, sir, Professor Bewaji, and particularly having lived on the other side of the Atlantic, I was so much interested when you say training, and I begin to think about Kwanzaa and also Joseph Ari's triadic relationship in the context of Omoluabi or Ubuntu. Omoluabi in particular because I am a Yoruba boy primarily, and how you were able to infuse that in training your children or in the children of your colleagues, whether in North or South America and indeed in the Caribbean. So we would like you to shed more light on that with us. We also would like you to give us a kind of a personal narrative in terms of your permanent migration, or what we can call semi-permanent migration, because in your words, you still travel forth and back. And if the VC was with us, I know he will have asked question about migration in what context. Is it permanent? Is it temporary? And I will stop there. So the next person, please stop sharing so that you can see.
Okay.
You have to stop. Just click the sharing content and you will stop. So let me unmute as follow the people that have identified. Professor Motayo, I believe you are going first. Motayo, I ask you to unmute, sir. Professor Molola, I've asked you to also unmute. If you've unmute, you can speak. Anyone, I think I can, okay, Professor Okagbari. So whoever is first to unmute can just, you know.
I think Professor Omoluabi has unmuted.
Okay, you can go ahead. I've unmuted, I've asked for them to unmute. Sorry, Professor Omoluabi, before you speak, who is user 766683? If you identify yourself, there's no name, but I can see what I'm seeing here is an indication of maybe one of our teachers of teachers, the picture, and maybe Professor Bewaji know this person. Or the person can just I will try to unmute you, sir, 766, so that you can share with us. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much, Professor Ipikunle and Professor Bewaji. I just don't know where to start, whether to make comment or to ask questions. But the first impression
all of the above.
Thank you. The first impression that I got as a Professor Bewaji was going through his presentation was, how would I attack him? Have a question that would throw him off his balance. But I tried as much as I could to get questions that would throw him off his balance until I got to the end. Until he got to the end of his presentation. This is not an attack, sir. So I really, in fact, you added to my knowledge in the area of philosophy. And I think that, I don't know what other, I know that we have Professor Soglo and other great philosophers and erudite scholars around. I like the aspect that you brought in, the Ubuntu, because I am because we are, or because you are. So that is like the Omoluabi concept of the Yoruba-speaking people of Nigeria, Benin Republic, and in the diaspora. So my concern is the last part of your presentation, which I want you to expand on, looking at what is going on about the idea of range, the political, and the connection is the connection between the range and the destructive tendency of, I'm sorry to say, this is not to offend anyone. If we read news about Nigeria, for instance, and in some part, when you talk about the hearts, even though it was not something in the past, but recently, or the past few years, you hear of herdsmen doing all sorts of things that you cannot even imagine. And it's becoming something that has given a serious concern to the West Africans, particularly Nigeria. So how do we handle this? Because you came up that a ranch could be is a good idea, but the political interpretation and the feasible disruptions that go with a ranch. So what ideas African ideas do you think, philosophical ideas, that are practical and can be research-oriented, positive research-oriented? I mean, what can help us in a situation like this? But because if I'm asked, I would say ranch, except it is localized by the local people. So maybe you want to say more on this. I don't want to.
Thank you, please. Thank you very much, Professor Omoluabi. Where are you based?
I'm based, I teach at Howard in the Department of World Languages and Cultures. Howard University in Washington, DC. Yes, I left Morgan State University. I'm at Howard now.
You left Morgan, they paid you more at Howard. That's good. We'll talk. You'll come and pay your tithe at my church.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to, Professor Omoluabi is a colleague. We were together at Morgan State. All right, thank you, sir. The next person is Professor Omotayo. Professor Omotayo, you have the floor, sir. Professor Omotayo. Okay.
Hello.
Go ahead, sir.
I'm Dr. Topo Omotayo. My elder brother, you are referring to is Professor Omotayo in that school, but I'm joining this from my baby.
Okay, I thought it was Professor Omotayo.
No, I'm his younger brother.
I just confirmed, Professor. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes, my own contribution. Can I continue?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Do I have the floor to continue, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I did appreciate the presentation by Professor Bewaji. I got this thing from my brothers a few hours ago. That's Professor Omotayo. But my own contribution is that the issue of Omoluabi can be further interrogated from the perspective of African literature. I use things for apart to explain the concept of African traditional welfare system that predates Elizabethan Polo of 1601. I presented that paper in Botswana in 2005. From it, we can see all forms of well-organized African setting that predate whatever they are doing now in Europe or America. That's why I appreciate the perspective that about Abeokuta be more organized in terms of governance, even before the European came. Africa is rich and deep. And I found out that if you go to some of this African literature, you'll be able to interrogate and make deduction of what predate what Europeans have shown to us as their own idea we have got. If you look at the concept of Okonkwo in that book, it was a whole gamut of welfare system. And also, I study aging. I've been able to use the concept of African respect for elderly people to be able to interrogate and interpret the present modernization of that is affecting other persons in terms of retirement and about the care we give to them. So in my submission, I will advise that maybe the university curriculum should start interrogating African literature in bringing out the salient or a positive perspective of Africans had before the European came. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Professor Okagbari.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to thank the presenter for drawing our attention once more to the need for Africans to recognize that they are human beings and they have a very great history. Now, we must continue to respect ourselves, respect our thoughts. We must continue to develop our own history, because the way it stands is like many of us today don't seem to have even confidence in ourselves anymore. We just believe that everything that is Western is good. And so we must continue to talk about it. Now, talking of ranching, it is important for all communities, because I'm an animal scientist, so I can say that all communities need to begin to plan for the future by putting together an area that can be used for grazing. It may not necessarily be that it has to be, it doesn't have to be a grazing land for Fulanis. It should be a grazing land for the community. if you are in Oyo, Oyo should have a grazing land for Oyo people. And of course, if there are people who are alien to the place and they come in and they want to graze the animals, with simple understanding, they should be allowed also to graze, but not a grazing land for foreigners, as it were. I want to thank Prof for that presentation, and I hope we will continue on this trajectory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Professor Bewaji, you have the space, the virtual space to...
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. I noted all the comments and the questions, and I'm indeed very grateful that people were listening very attentively to the little I was trying to say. Teaching, which Professor Omoluabi spoke about in terms of Kwanzaa, and which Professor Tijani also mentioned in terms of my own migratory experiences. It's very, very difficult. One of the few regrets I have in life is having to translocate my entire family into an area where my wife and I became the only people taking care of our children. I do hope that we have not failed totally, in that particular effort. But, we are very lucky. We are very lucky the kids, they have grown now to be adults and they are doing well in their own different things. But you see, I was reading something about education some years back. When you go to the Western primary school, they start teaching you A, B, C, D, all that, as if you had no language before you came there. Nobody taught you about your own indigenous languages. And consequently, it's like you're a tabula rasa, now being filled with ideas. So consequently, because we have not been taught about our ancestry, which was systematically denied and destroyed through what I call epistemicide, we have lost that capacity to appreciate what is good in our traditions. All societies borrow from one another. Africans have always migrated from North Africa to East Africa to South Africa. I mean, I got to Botswana and I met somebody from Malawi. Okay? You will be very surprised. His last name is actually an Igbo name. And this is somebody coming from Malawi. Okay? His name is Amanze. So when he visited, I think it was University of Nigeria to give a lecture, people started speaking Igbo to him, not knowing that he was coming from Malawi, living in Botswana. So I'm saying this because we have lost so much. And what has happened, especially with this idea of borrowing into this social contract foolishness, where democracy itself is bogus and useless, as it is West, is the zero-sum politics that we play, where winner takes all. That was never the case in indigenous African societies, because everybody must contribute, everybody must be taken care of. Actually, it's disgrace for you to live in an environment where your own family member is a destitute. And that is something that is going to be referenced globally, that, oh, you don't see him. He's driving a BMW. His brother couldn't even have a single dress on his back. So what kind of achievement, what kind of success is it? So my brother who mentioned using this thing as true literature. Indeed, I mean, I was reading, anytime I come home, I buy all these books by D.O. Fagunwa and the rest of them. I was saying to someone that when you look at Ubuntu and what the West has done with Power Rangers and various other children movies and all that, it's like they read these things and then they translate them into digital something. And they never acknowledge, they will never tell you that Power Rangers was based on Ubuntu. They won't. That's exactly what happens to us because we don't do what we should do. And I'm suggesting that we have no alternative to ranching. It is what is done in New Zealand. It is what is done in Australia. It is what is done in Brazil. It is what is done in Botswana. Botswana have more cattle than human beings. And all my colleagues at the University of Botswana, they had their, what they call the cattle posts, okay? And if you know Botswana, you know it's also very desert. That is where you have the Kalahari Desert. We spell it Kalahari, but they spell it Kalahari, okay? And what do? They have boreholes, they irrigate. They irrigate, you can grow grass anywhere in the world. We talk about the Jewish magic in the state of Israel, a land flowing with milk and honey. Israel is located in an arid, God-forsaken, desolate area. All they did was to use human ingenuity to transform it into a land flowing with milk and honey. And with all the money they get from Germany and the US, billions, every year they're able to sustain, themselves. So there's no alternative. And Awolowo knew this. In my town, Esauke, we had what is called the farm settlement. They had the cattle section. So what, Prof. Kagbari, what you were saying is indeed very true. And if you look at the template, when I was speaking with somebody who is very well connected to Dr. Fayemi, they were talking about all kinds of hairy-fairy ideas. I said, bullshit. Sorry, forgive my language. I'm so sorry. I said, Sam Aluko worked with Awolowo to have a template for 50 years down the road for Western region. That was the basis of all. They were even breeding cattle. Okay, they were breeding cattle. They brought in cattle from Mali that were resistant to trypanosomiasis. Professor Okagbare, I believe you will know this. And consequently, they were able to do so much. And when Ronald Reagan visited Tokyo, trying to market American products, you know what they told him? They said to him that any country that is capable of feeding its citizens has no business being independent. And we are so blessed in Nigeria, in Africa, that all we have to do is to look inwards, and we'll be able to do so much more. All this quarreling, I told somebody I know in the North that their foolishness about taking over the country is absolutely useless. It will. And if it does happen, it will be worse than Rwanda. And then the person said, oh, God forbid. I said, this is not about God. God has given us everything that we need. We have been so blessed beyond words. The question is, do we have the imagination to do what we need to do? Prof, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Baba is clapping, so let's clap for Prof. Professor Sogolo is clapping. So we all Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So we now yield to Professor Sogolo to round it up, and then we call it a day. Usually we do record, and then we do also post on YouTube. So henceforth, you can kindly also go on YouTube to see our previous recordings and also share with colleagues. .com.ng. So while Prof is talking, I'd like to share, this with you. The server is okay. Professor Sogolo, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Tijani. I want to say that today is a very great day for philosophy, and I think it's a great day for the center. We have this privilege of, listening to a special mind. Professor Bewaji, maybe I say this to his hearing for the first time. I'm indeed very proud of you. And I always say that, how we lost you to the diaspora, it's a big regret. And up to today, I always say that one of our great philosophers, stays outside, although every now and then he comes in to Nigeria. So we still have his presence here in Nigeria. But he's truly an encyclopedia of philosophy. And we know that from his presentation, you can see that he has a mind that will be very much useful to Nigeria if he were really here fully speaking to our children, lecturing our children, and so forth in the Nigerian university. Fortunately, is in the diaspora. But I hope that someday he will come in here and be fully with us. The aspect of his discussion, which I find very, very intriguing and always very interesting, is that the very concept of the social contract theory itself, which he started with, and then the whole idea of Ubuntu, Omoluabi, and so forth. They all zero on humanism, because that is his own idea. It talks about humanism and the definition of a human, the person in terms of I and we and so forth. The African concept of a person, which I think is very, very useful, and is something that we should always, insist that our children should understand. I want to congratulate you, Professor Biwaji. For some time now, you have not. We used to talk on phone, but I hope we continue with our interaction as usual.
Ogame, I'm at your beck and call.
Congratulations, because
I'm now retired. I'm now retired from the University of the West Indies. So
you cannot retire. You cannot retire. You must continue. See, you must benefit from your experience. Like you have done now. And this is one of the reasons I always commend this center. The center has made now to be actual what a university should be. And this is one of the great things that Professor Tijani is doing in now. This is what a university should be, where every week we're experiencing, discussing with intellectuals, discussing with scholars from all aspects of, all disciplines and from all parts of the world. Thank you very much. And once more,
thank you, sir.
Professor Tijani. Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
May I'm projecting the Vice Chancellor's approval and the letter he has directed the registry to write. I've also sent to Professor Bewaji's WhatsApp number, and I will forward to him as an email. I would like Professor Emeritus to virtually present this to him, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's written, so you can just read it out and then we call it a day.
Yes, if I can read it from here.
Okay, so can you? If you cannot, yeah. I can. I think
I can. I can.
Ooh. All right, sir.
I can. Yeah. Professor, just a minute. Professor John Biwaji, University of the West Indies, appointment as Professorial Fellow and Distinguished Lecturer at the Center of Excellence for Migration Studies. I'm pleased to inform you. I'm pleased to inform you the Vice Chancellor has approved your appointment as Professorial Fellow and Distinguished Lecturer at the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies, CEMGS, for a period of 2 months with effect from 1st November to 31st December 2020. Please accept our congratulations. Signed, John Umbaji, Director of Human Resources for Registrar. So congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
I am
Thank
humbled.
you.
Thank you.
And
One of our
this is
achievements.
also renewable. It's also renewable. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I thank each and every one of you for finding the time to come. God bless you. Thank you all. And bye-bye for now.
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Congrats.